first of all, thank you for coming on. Obviously,
Thank you for inviting me.
well, you followed me on Instagram, and then me, curious as ever, I always, okay, who's following me? Who are these
hmm
people? And I saw that you had a podcast, right? And so I started listening to it,
hmm
and then I saw that you're Honduran, and then I'm like, all right, well,
Who
that's,
is this girl?
I mean, I'm not. You're very into identity, and that's, we'll get into
Yeah.
that. I'm not so much, but I'm Honduran. I'm proud. I've written about it for years now, and I decided to put the Honduran flag up because I was like, what are there's not that many Hondurans in America.
There is not. No, I got excited when I saw that you were Honduran too. So, of course, I had to follow you.
Right. So I put up the flag because I'm like, okay, this has got to be a special thing. We're both
Yeah.
young. We're both Honduran, first gen.
hmm
Think about all the people back in Honduras who, can't even imagine having a podcast the way we're doing right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because of means, because of resources.
Yeah. Yeah. Completely agree. So, I want to tell you how I found you.
No, that's interesting. Yeah.
So,
Because it's like
because
I'm kind of hidden. So I'm like, how did you find me?
yeah, so I was reading about the term Latinx
Ooh,
because that has been a big topic, right? And a lot of people, my podcast, the name of it is Hella Latino, Hella Latina. It's with the @ sign at the end. So it's like whatever most relates to whoever is reading it, right?
right.
And that was something that was asked of me. Why didn't you use Latinx? Um, and I was real and I was like, I just don't agree with the term for myself. But if you identify that way, there's no like beef. There's like nothing like that. I will totally
No
100%
beef.
respect you. There's no
We
beef. Like
beefing.
I will
We beefing.
yeah. No, but seriously, I'm like I respect however you identify, but for me specifically, I always say Latina, and that's the term that most reflects me. And I have never met anyone that is an American that used the term Latinx. So
Unless
that's
they're
just
not in
another topic.
academia, they're not a professor, they just took a
Yeah.
critical race theory class.
Yeah, exactly. So out of total curiosity, I was like, I really want to read people's opinions on this
Yeah.
term Latinx and all the other identifiers that our community has, right?
Yeah.
Hispanic, Spanish, Latino, Latina, Latino, the @ sign. There's so many. And so I read this article and it said it had this quote in there, and it said by Hector, Afro-Honduran. And I was like, oh, who's Hector?
Really? They identified me as Afro-Honduran?
Afro-Honduran. And I was like, whoa, like, who is this guy? And so I looked you up and I saw that you had a magazine. And then, of course, I just did more digging. And then I found your Instagram and I was like, I'm going to follow this guy.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Your podcast is you started in June and it's really taken off. I mean, are you surprised by
Yeah.
how the response? I mean, you're kind of surprised, but then
Yeah.
kind of not, because then you talk in the show about how you knew that people needed these kinds of conversations, and you bring people on. For anybody who's interested, it's called Hello Latina Podcast, and you bring people on and you really unpack, which is one of your favorite words. You really
It
unpack their
is.
identity and experiences and how where we come from really dictates how we see ourselves and how we see our moves in the world, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yes and no. I'm very surprised of how many people have reached out to me about it. Like yes, the numbers and the amount of people listening in, like that to me is it's impressive, and
Right.
I'm like always shook by it every time I see it. But the part that like inspires me and kind of shocks me the most is how many people have reached out to me and said, I can relate to this person, or thank you for sharing this story, or here's my story, or thank you for talking about machismo. Like it could be anything, any of the episodes that I've had, and they always point out these details, which makes me feel like, oh my God, they're legit listening to the episodes.
Yeah.
And so to me, that is the part that motivates me. That's the part that really shows me like I'm doing something bigger than just what I imagined it to be from the
Yeah.
beginning. So yeah, in a way, I'm like surprised. I'm like, this is crazy. My little pod is just like growing up into this, like, big thing. And I really just started out of passion. I didn't start it because I'm like, I know it's going to like get all these likes and blah, blah, blah. But I just really started because that's how I felt. I'm like, I just want to be able to tell my story and have others reflect on it too. And, it came out of a lot of different things, which I touch on my first episode.
No, but that's a great way to start something that's out of passion because, I mean, as you know, things get tough. Things are going to get tough. And if you don't have that passion, if you didn't start this thing because of passion, when shit gets tough, you're going to be like, ah, fuck this. I don't really care about
Yeah.
this. But if you're passionate, like I decided to be a writer way back when. And there's so many times I wanted to quit, right? But because I started out of passion, you kind of burn into it. And then when you're cooling off, you just keep burning. Your own momentum, your own inertia carries you forward.
And there's a common thread between the creatives, right? Writing, podcasting, all of
Right.
it. Like you have to be hella vulnerable. And that's one thing that I love about my podcast, but also kind of scares me. I think with every artist, with every person that's creative, it's like you create the best when you're vulnerable, but it's also like you're putting so much of yourself out into the world.
Well, it was like that
And it's
depression
like,
and
ugh.
machismo, that depression and machismo episode. I was like, I'm listening and it's sad, and I could relate to Alex Magana. I'm not gonna give away too much away from the story. You guys have to listen to that episode. Depression and machismo, right? And
Depression and machismo culture.
I'm
Yeah.
over there in my bed, just drinking, smoking, listening to this thing yesterday. I'm getting prepared for the episode today, and
Yeah.
then somewhere he gets on the bridge, and I'm like, holy shit, man, that became a real ass story.
Mm-hmm.
And I've talked about my own experience with that in college, like standing on the subway platform and seeing the train coming, and like for an instant thinking like, ooh, should I jump? Because life is just getting too heavy. But yeah, I mean, you're very curious and you're very open and kind, and people really kind of come to that energy is important because people come to you with
Yeah.
their vulnerabilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember Delilah. Oh, I don't know if you guys have that out in Cali. I'm from Chicago. I live in Vegas now.
Oh, yeah. I'm in California.
Did you guys have Delilah, the light,
No.
where she was like a white woman on the radio, and she would talk in a very soothing voice, and people would call in and they
Oh,
would tell
no.
her like their terrible life stories, and it's because she
Mm.
had that energy about her, and that's what it's a very intimate podcast that you have.
Oh, thank you.
It sounds like people just catching up on the phone, right? And so you're kind of
Yeah.
eavesdropping, and people love that, right?
That was the goal. Cause all of my favorite podcasts have been that where it's like literally it's a chismosa in me. I always say
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like, I'm like curious, right? Like, what are they talking about? And this and that. That's really what I wanted it to be. I'm like, I don't want to have this whole like segment and like all these
yeah,
questions
yeah.
listed out for them. I want it to be completely real, completely authentic, and just having like two amigos catching up over,
Yeah.
some cafecito or whatever it is that we have there. But really, it is. Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. It is really just me having conversations out of natural curiosity.
And I get the same thing. Like I'm sure people before they come on, they're like, oh, what are we going to talk about? They think it's like an
Yeah.
interview, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
I try to tell them it's not an interview. Like we're just going to shoot the shit. We're just going to chat, right? And they're like, oh, and they're like, and they think I'm tricking them, or they think that I'm bringing them on to do gotchas or something like that. I'm like, no, I'm just, if I met up with you to have a cafecito, like you say, that what would we talk about, right? I mean, and so
All the things.
I mean, for you, is starting the podcast also like, and you say this too, so I guess I'm throwing you the softball, like starting the podcast, you get to meet people that you wouldn't normally get to, you'd meet them, but you wouldn't get to sit down and talk to them about like how they feel about things that happen to them. That's the most interesting thing for me to having a podcast. Like if nobody listens, that's the best part about having it. I mean, how do you feel about that?
It's that part, right? Like even if no one's listening, like for me, this is so fulfilling because I feel like I'm learning and unlearning about my community every single episode. I'm like, oh, is that what Dominicans say? Or, oh, is that the experience an Afro-Latina has? I'm learning so much about my community because, again, it's so diverse and people don't even realize that.
Yeah.
But, going back to what you said, it is very much like an intimate conversation, all out of curiosity. And the people that I do have on there, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't otherwise talk to them. And maybe I would, we'd schedule some time, but I think people are always just inclined to do a podcast. They're like, oh, yeah. And what I love about it is, I would do these conversations all the time. I work in communication, so I talk a lot. but I always have these
Were you a
conversations with
talker
people. I'm
before,
like,
like as a kid?
I was not
Oh wow,
actually.
that's
I
interesting.
was hella shy. Yeah, we could touch on that, but
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. You know,
we're gonna get to that.
we're gonna give you the treatment that you give people on your show.
I know. Let's unpack together. No, but it's yeah, I mean, I would have these like coffee dates all the time with people for work or, just for networking. And it was always the same. Like, this is my all the internships I've had. And they always just seemed like they had it all together. And I was always just curious about them. I'm like, I don't really care. I mean, yes, it's amazing. You're super successful, but I'm like, who are you like with all of that just not in
You're
your
not interested
face?
in the mask. I'm the same way.
Yeah, that.
Like
I'm
we're all
like,
going through shit. Tell me your shit. I'll tell you my shit.
yes. So I'm like, I'm the kind of person that's like, let's just get vulnerable right away.
Right,
Like,
right.
just like all the mess, like all the mess, all the labels, like, cool, I'm proud of you, but I don't care about him at the end of the day. I want to know who you are so that I can be inspired by you. Like, to me,
Yeah.
that's the inspiring part, not so much all the titles and accomplishments and all the money you make.
The posing
You know what
for
I'm
each
saying?
other and stun for each
Yeah.
other, which is so
Hmm.
toxic. You know, it's like really toxic because like everybody's stunning on each other. Everybody's making each other feel bad for what?
Yeah.
Like everybody walking around with their chest puffed up and like, look what I got. Like, why are you making everybody feel bad? Like, just
Yeah, it
be
reminds me of like
grateful for what you.
cavemen, you know? I'm like, come on, we're evolving. Like, let's just like be real. And again, that's like my tagline, be real. And in this new episode with Joshua Encarnacion, a Dominican guy, we talk about that. Like, life is a constant process of just trying to be real, practicing how to be real. Because I was the same way. Like, I thought I was hot shit because I had all these things, all these accomplishments. And then I realized I'm not, this isn't me, without all of them. I don't know what it is. I don't know who I am. I don't know what life is. And I was going through this whole identity crisis you just mentioned. I love identity and I'm big on that. Like, that's why, because for a long time I defined myself with all these titles. And I thought that was the most important thing. That's what people wanted to hear because that's what I was used to. But I got to a point where I'm like, you know what? No one cares. I don't care. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Nobody cares when you don't care.
That part, I'm like, who am I trying to impress? Who am I trying to be like? Like, I just need to be myself. And figuring out who myself was a whole process. And this is, again, why the podcast started. It was just natural curiosity. I'm like, I want to just get to know people without all of the fake masks and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like you talked about identity crisis. I mean, you can point to so many times in your life where you had an identity crisis, and then you realize, oh, like life is just one long identity crisis, right? Like,
it is.
You figure, you probably don't figure yourself out even on your deathbed. You're like, what was that all about?
Mm-hmm.
But I guess, yeah, I wanted to dive. You gave us a little bit of yourself in the 15-minute first episode, but I really wanted to, again, you're the first Latino, the first Honduran that I have spoken to who's not related to me. I've been to Honduras a few times. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to like, share scars with you kind of in a little bit. You talk about how, well, tell us about, growing up. How did your parents are immigrants?
Mm-hmm. My whole family is. So I'm the youngest of 7, technically 8. I have a brother in Honduras who I've never met, but
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Full brother?
Yeah. Half brother. So all of my siblings are half. My parents were both born in Honduras. So funny. So I don't know where in Honduras,
Santa
your
Lucia, just
from.
outside of Tegu.
Oh, my family's from La Costa Norte, so Choloma y San Pedro Sula. But my dad, so cute. My dad was born in San Pedro Sula, raised in Choloma, and my mom opposite. So she was born in Choloma and raised in San Pedro Sula. And if people know, like, they're right next to each other, so it's like not that like far apart, but they never met each other in Honduras, but they knew each other's families. And my dad played soccer with all my tios, and my mom chismeaba con todas mis tías from my dad's side. So it's funny, like they were so connected, but they never met each other until they both landed in San Diego for completely different reasons. But they both had a whole life in Honduras, whole families. And they came to San Diego and they were trying to find a new start, and they found themselves and they fell in love and they had me.
Wait, so they came for different reasons. How old were they when they came?
My dad was, how old was my dad? He was, I think, in his mid-20s, and my
Yeah.
mom was like probably in her early 30s. So my dad kind of was everywhere. So it was like this is a pretty common story, but he came here on La Tren de la Bestia, which is a train that kind of runs from Central America to Mexico, and then from there they kind of find their way wherever they want to go. So my dad lived in Mexico for a while. He lived in Guatemala for a while, and then he went to the U.S. and didn't like it. Went back to Mexico, so he was kind of everywhere. Era como un vago, just like touring around the world. But my mom went to the United States with 4 kids, and she was pregnant. So she left one of my brothers in Honduras. She came with 4 other kids, which were my siblings, and then she was pregnant with my brother. She almost gave birth to my brother in Mexico because she was trying to cross the border.
Yeah, yeah.
But she got to San
Aguántese,
Diego,
aguántese.
and then yeah, I want this. But she came to San Diego and then met up with my tias that were here, and yeah, she met my dad like a couple years after, and yeah, then they had me. I was a total surprise. They weren't planning to have me. Um, it was like a big cheese man, like estos dos viejos teniendo una hija. Like, what are they doing? But look at me now. I'm
Yeah.
here.
I mean, so what
Yeah.
did you know about Honduras growing up? I mean, for me, it was like this magical place. It was like this place where there's just ghosts and La Lechuza and stuff like that. Like, and I didn't really, like you said, people didn't know where you would say I'm Honduran. For me, you said that people said a Hungarian. For me, Hindu, because when I was younger, I was dark and skinny and had big fro. And so they're like, Hindu? I'm like, no, Honduras. I would always say it's the second hump.
Yeah,
but
I would have to over-explain. This is where Honduras is. Do you know where Costa Rica is? No? Okay. Do you know where? And I would have to explain like, okay, Mexico is just down. And like literally, it's like exhausting trying to explain. Sometimes I just be like, Honduran.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you anything else.
Well, I mean, now people know about Honduras, but it's still bad,
Now they
like,
do.
It's just, migrants, and so I think it's really important. Again, this whole podcast thing, you having a podcast is important because it's like, people think of us as think of Hondurans as like these people who come huddled and, and scared and all this stuff. And like, no, some of us are powerful. Some of us are tech savvy, social media savvy, savvy in the world, right? And that's that kind of breaks the
trailblazers and for sure. And that's one thing, and I talk about this a lot in my episodes, but the representation, even thinking of Latinos as a whole, when people think of us, they think narcos, or they think, like, oh, like marijuana and cocaine, and like, oh, I watch Narcos, and like, or they think the opposite. They think of people like Sofia Vergara, especially for Latina women, like very sexualized. But they also don't know anything about the diversity of Latinidad. They think Mexico or Colombia or Puerto Rico. They think of these big places or places that have a big presence, I should say, but they don't think of the diversity, all of the different, even like in Honduras, thinking of Honduras as its own like place, like the diversity, like you said,
I'm from
Honduras
La Costa. That's its own culture from Tegu.
There's
Tegu's the capital.
yes.
Garifuna, right? I've been to Ceiba, I've been to Tela, I've been to San Pedro Sula.
Yeah. A lot of diversity. And that's one thing, like, again, like you and I probably have very different, I mean, we are from different places. We have
you're just being from San Diego. Just listening to your Honduran upbringing, Honduran American upbringing, is different than mine. One, because I'm half Puerto Rican. Two, I'm from Chicago, where Puerto Rican culture is dominant. Honduran, there's no Honduran culture. There's no.
Yeah.
You grew up with your Honduran family, right? You said, or you had.
Yeah.
I really like the conversation you had with Emily Rodriguez too. Your psych friend.
Yeah.
She really talked about how being half Filipino, or the Guyanese, Gabriela being Guyanese and Honduran, like it's really important for even Latinos. Like we're not even doing this for white people, right? We're doing this for Latinos. Like you know, you could be Latino in every different way. You don't have to know Spanish, like you said in a recent episode. And but it's interesting that when people adopt their or re-adopt their Latino culture, that they actually, I find they go to stereotypes, right? Don't you think? I mean, they'll overdo it, and it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to celebrate their culture, but not really. And so there's the whole like how do you think about Christopher Columbus? Like I used to be a managing editor for Latino Rebels, and we published this thing by John Marcantoni, who's a Puerto Rican, and he talked about a defense of Columbus, right? Defending Columbus, that
Mm.
we come from Columbus. If Columbus
Mm-hmm.
never came, he's a racist, he's a slave driver, ignorant, greedy,
Mm-hmm.
the devil incarnate. But we come from that motherfucker, right? We come from him. His blood is in us, right?
Unfortunately, yeah.
Look at our names. Look at the language we speak, right? He brought that
Mm-hmm.
here. And so, I mean, how do you see your Latino-ness? Really, like really.
Mm-hmm.
I heard a gulp there.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
No, it's interesting. I just, a couple of days ago, I had a conversation for my podcast, another episode that's coming out with this woman who, if people are familiar with We All Grow Latina, she's a partner of We All Grow Latina, and she's a Colombian Dominican woman who was raised in Dominican Republic and Miami. And we had just like the best conversation about this very topic, about ancestry, identity, all these things. And we talked about identity in the way that's so different than how I ever discussed it. And it was about a collection of your experiences. And I think identity is just a very interesting topic. Like we can spend forever talking about this, but
right.
thinking of Columbus, thinking of all those things, I had no idea about. I mean, obviously I knew about Columbus, but I'm going to be real with you. Like I didn't know anything about where Latinos came from. All I knew was Honduras. Then there's Mexico, and they're Latinos too.
Yeah.
That's how I grew
I
up.
think we all did,
And
though, right? You knew
yeah, I
your
mean,
country, where your parents come from, and that's really much it.
yeah. And I mean, even if I really think back to the way I grew up around, I mean, all Black and brown kids, in like a low income neighborhood. And we obviously hung out with a lot of other, Latinos. And of course I would be like, that person speaks different. Like they speak more with a Puerto Rican accent, but I couldn't say those words. Like I didn't even know Puerto Rico was like its own thing at the time. I'd just be like, oh, they speak differently than we do. But
Yeah.
they still speak Spanish. I still understand them, but he speaks so fast. Like I would
Yeah.
just say these things, and that's how I grew up. And it wasn't until I got to college and I started like really like learning from all these people. Like I remember one girl told me, "Oh, are you like indigenous?" And I'm like, what?
Mm.
And I didn't know, like, I didn't even know how to like answer that question. I was like, I've never been asked that. And I would
You
ask
start
my
fucking
parents
beating
here.
your ass. I don't
Yeah.
got that shit.
I was like, I don't know. But that's not something our parents talk about. I mean, at
Yeah.
least my parents,
No,
like they didn't even have time to hang out with us because they were working all the time. And so I didn't know. And it wasn't until I watched, and I talk about this in my first episode, I was watching all these things, I was reading all these books, but really it was John Leguizamo, his Netflix special, that like sparked all of this, like, what in the world? Like, I didn't realize that our history is so complex, and no wonder we all struggle so much with identity and like trying to navigate who we are. It's because we have a pretty messed up history,
Yeah.
if we really think about it.
Fucking John
And so
Leguizamo saves the day again. I mean, that guy, he's so
he's so
underrated.
good.
Like, if you
He
see his body at
is
work, it goes all the way back to the 80s, and he's been in everything.
everything.
Sid the Sloth. Come on, what more do you want? Like,
He's so good. But yeah, I mean, honestly, it's that. And then, really these last 2 years have been just me reflecting, like, who am I, talking about without the labels and all of that. It's really been me reflecting and being in the fields, allowing myself to be in the fields and like navigate through it, and reading more about not just Honduran culture, because that's what I grew up with. I already know about Honduras, but reading about Puerto Rican culture, Cuban culture. And like, I just kind of got obsessed with like reading about all of us in our own respect, because I don't know if you ever felt this way, but growing up and like starting to realize all these different countries, it kind of felt like a competition.
I mean,
Like
you still have that in
Honduras
Latino.
versus, yeah,
There's a
like
lot of
Honduras versus
nationalism in Latino culture, right?
a
Mexico,
lot.
Puerto Rico, Honduras. Oh, you're
Yeah.
Honduran? Nah, get the fuck out of here. What has Honduran ever done?
Yes. And I
You know what
would
I mean?
get so angry like every time. I'm a big soccer fan. And Honduras, we're not the best, but we always like everyone always talks shit about us. They're like, "Oh, this is why like Honduras never makes." I'm like, "Why does it have to be this competition?" And I got it, it's soccer, but even more so than just sports, it's all of it,
Yeah.
And like it's like some of my family members would be like, "Oh, Mexico just overpowers and they think blah blah blah." And I'm like, "Well, they're also like a big country,
Yeah, no,
So it's
my
like,
wife was born in Mexico, right? So,
yeah.
I go, there's 130 million of you motherfuckers. Like, we only have
Yes.
11 million in the whole world, and like what, another million in the United States. So it's like
Exactly. So I'm like, I mean,
anything little thing we
makes
do is
sense.
great. It's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, but it's that, right? I'm like, I want there to be more unity
Yeah.
in our Latino, ethnic group, because if we're not fighting for each other, then who's going to be fighting for us?
Yeah, I
So
think for
that's the
me
way I
that's
look at it.
and I think that's such a good point to make, because I think that's what made me kind of reject that Latino, that nationalism. That I
Mhm.
wasn't so Honduran. Like I was Honduran, and I wasn't so Puerto Rican. One being both, I couldn't like be super proud of one. You know what I mean? Like I
Mhm.
couldn't be like, oh, Puerto Rican, but because I'm half Honduran, and vice versa. But two, like having grown up around
You should be
Mexicans,
on my podcast.
for sure. Mexican, Guatemalans, growing up with all these different people, black people, Polish, Russian. I grew up in an
Mhm.
immigrant community. And so I'm like, dude, we're all fucking cool. Like, and we all come from different countries. So, maybe this country
Mhm.
thing is bullshit. And maybe like,
Mm.
and then having grown up with like I said, Russian and Polish immigrants and black people, maybe this race and ethnicity thing is bullshit, right? Maybe we're all just people, and like somebody's playing some trick on us by saying, oh, you guys are different because you guys come from here, or you guys look like this. And so I kind of rejected identity for a while, and it wasn't until Latino media that I had to really like find out about like I kind of did the same thing as you did, right? Like shed everything, and
Mhm.
then take on, okay, what am I? And then adopt it one by one, which is
Mhm.
fucking tough, right? Because you're
It's
like,
hard. I was talking about this because I mean, this to me is like personal growth, right? Like we're growing into our own. And when I hear personal growth and I see it on social media, for some reason, it just always sounds like rainbows and butterflies. I'm like, that is hard. Like it's hard
I
work
stay rolling
to,
my eyes, dude.
yeah, I'm like, it's hard. Like, why isn't anyone being like realistic about how this experience is? Because it's tough and it never ends. And someone I was talking to actually said it perfectly. She was like, this is going to happen at every point in your life. Going back to what you said in the beginning, this is going to happen over and over and over again. But if you know how to transition through those periods of your life, then it gets a little easier. But going back to personal growth, that is hard work because you're really like you're triggering yourself. Like you are literally peeling back all these layers that you had put on yourself and trying to get to the core of who you are. And then you go through this existential crisis like moment, and then you like question everything that you've ever done in your life. It's like
Yeah.
everything, right? And so it's a whole process. It's hard, but you do get into that space of appreciating yourself and kind of, speaking about self-love, like that's where I feel like it comes from, is really appreciating yourself and having gratitude for everything that you've been through, everything that you are. It's a whole process to get there. It's not
Yeah.
like it comes overnight. And even if you do get there, you're going to have your moments where you're like, I don't like myself today. Like it's just not my day today, Like, and
Yeah.
you don't, and that's okay too. And I want to normalize that. Like people want to seem like, again, they have it all together and they like have it all figured out. And I'm like, it's okay to not, It's okay to
Yeah.
just feel like I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I'm wearing Adidas pants and I'm not wearing any socks, so that's
I'm not wearing
that
any shoes.
that's how not together I am. And like, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Like people get sad, and as somebody who regularly gets sad, the thing I can
Mhm.
tell people is like, dude, you're just sad. It's momentary, just like being happy. Happy is momentary, right? And be
Mhm.
grateful for it. Be grateful for the happy moments, but
Yeah.
sadness is momentary too, because life is tough.
Yeah. Or even like, normalizing feeling different feelings at the same time.
Yeah.
You can be having the best day, but still just like feel sad or feel overwhelmed. And like, it's okay to feel both happy and overwhelmed. It's okay to feel both happy and sad. It's okay to just, it's okay. Like, there's so many rules about how you should feel and like this and that. And I'm just like, just
There's that
feel what
one
you feel.
song. There's this one song that has a tag. I think it's by Jessie J. Remember that singer
Mm,
from Britain?
mhm.
It's okay not to be okay. She has that line. It's
Yeah.
okay not to.
Yeah.
It's okay not to be okay or not to feel okay, something like that.
One of
And
those. Yeah.
it's
But
cheesy,
it's
but
true.
that's so true. It's just that's why it's
It is
cheesy because
hella
it's true.
cheesy.
But it's
Yeah.
true. And just talking to you right now, thinking about it, like you bring out like that your mom, is not able to do this, right? She doesn't know about self-care at all. And if you tell her about it, she's gonna be like, get the fuck out of here. I got too much to do, right? I just got too much to do.
Always thinking.
Even when
always
they don't.
like on high alert. Yeah.
Now that they're older, they can relax and they're like, no, I gotta still.
No.
You told that story about she cooks food for her dog now. That's crazy.
I am not joking. Like they've gotten to this whole new level of wanting to do something. And like my dad started gardening because he just got bored one day. So like he has this like all his like spices and flowers, and he's into that now. My mom cooks for the dogs, and like the dogs eat like humans, and I'm like, this is not healthy for them, but it's fine. Yeah. I'm gonna let you train your dogs. But it is funny, but thinking about it, it is kind of like this is how their life has always been. Like if I really think about my mom, since she was 19 years old, she's been a mom.
My mom too, 19. She had me at 19.
She had you at 19?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like they've been mothers their entire life, and their entire life they have supported others, done things for other people. And even thinking of my mom's story coming here, her life was survivor mode when she came here. So how do you like uncondition yourself to just like relax and think about self-care?
Our whole culture has PTSD because of,
our whole culture. Yeah.
From what they went through, and then they put it on us. They tell us what happened to them from when we were babies, right? This is how I had to eat shit every day of my life for 20 years. Yeah. And so you grow up with these stories.
So much trauma.
Yeah. And we're like, and they give us coffee since we're like 1 year old. I've been drinking coffee since I had no teeth.
Out the womb, they just like give you some caffeine.
Oh yeah, because they're drinking it too, right, when you're pregnant.
Yeah.
But what was I gonna say? Like, yeah, I mean, it's funny how, and you talk about that, like how your mom can relate to that, but in a way, we try to compare our grind to our parents' grind or our grandparents' grind. Like, I can't complain because my grandma, had no shoes for a year and blah, blah, blah. And she did that. And all she ate was quesadillas for 2 years or whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
But in a way, we're kind of like the complete opposite, not only the complete opposite of our parents and everybody who came before us, but we're like the inside out version of them. Because whereas they worked, and were physical and ignored everything going on inside them, right? To the point where, like you bring up that Latino men tend to drink a lot. That's a really good theory that you have. That Latino men tend to drink a lot because of that, because they can't express their emotions, be vulnerable in any way. And or the women, right? The women are, I won't speak for all of them, but there's a lot of very angry mothers, right? Who yell a lot and who throw chanclas and who fucking all this stuff, right? That's anger. That's something inside of you. And, I know she's yelling at her kid, but that's not how we would react now, right? And because we're doing a lot of internal.
Let's talk about it.
Right.
Let's unpack.
That's my point. Like, is that we're doing a lot of internal work. We're doing a lot of internal work, and that leaves us drained. Even though we're not working maybe physically as hard as our parents did, we're doing a lot of internal work, and they kind of don't understand that. I don't know about your parents, but my parents, my people older than us, they think like they don't understand how you can be mentally exhausted, especially with the kind of jobs that we have. Like, we're not cleaning houses, we're not selling mangoes on the off ramp, right? So why should we be physically tired? But we're doing a lot of internal work, and we have been for a long time.
And it's just something that they can't relate to. And I, in a way, consider myself pretty fortunate to have experienced both sides. Like my first job was cleaning houses with my mom, and, going through homelessness, I like got a taste of what the trauma that they experienced. Not that they wanted me to experience that, but I got to experience a little bit of like, no, they of course did
not like
want
sending
me
you to Venice for the experience.
No, this is like life. So I got to experience that, and now opposite, now I'm like financially secure, I'm like college educated. And so I know I'm really privileged in a lot of ways. And I know what motivates me to keep doing what I'm doing is because I know this is why my parents worked so hard their whole lives. And that's why they keep working hard, even though I'm like, all your children are grown, like y'all can chill, but they just can't. And that's
They can't
okay
chill.
too. You know, that's okay too. Like I can't be forcing my agenda on them, but you know, it keeps motivating me because I'm like, one thing that my dad always said was, yo trabajo con las manos, so that you can work with your brain, you know, so that you
That's
can like
beautiful.
go get
Yeah.
an education. And I always remember that because I'm like, this is what they wanted. And I'm gonna just keep representing and I'm gonna keep making them proud. And I know that's like a very first gen experience kind of thing. Like we're gonna make our parents proud. But that's just really like my motivator.
The pressure to do that is so great because, like you bring up in
It's
your show,
huge.
that's why they're here. They didn't come here for themselves, really. You know,
No.
it was too late for them. Your mom was in her 20s and your dad was in his 30s, so they already experienced life and they were already jaded by life in Honduras because life in Honduras is fucking rough.
It's
so
different.
They became cynical. But for their kids, they wanted a different life, different opportunities, and so we can't be hippies. There's no hippie culture in immigrant culture, you know?
No.
You know?
I joke about that because one of my ex-boyfriends, this is going to get real vulnerable, but he wanted to travel after college. And I'm like, that's cool for you, but I can't do that because I can't afford it. You know, I can't afford to just not have a job and go travel the world. That sounds amazing. Maybe when I'm like 40.
What ethnicity, race was he?
He was a white boy. So again, very, very different. And I talk a little bit about this in one of my episodes, but it's interesting dating other races because you really reflect on your own experiences and you're like, wow, I'm very different. And like, not in a bad way at all, but just our values, the way that we see life, perspectives. Like, for example, I really valued education. And, you know, people around me who were white or, you know, my ex-boyfriend's friends, they were just like, oh, school's whatever. And I'm like, what? And I would get so like, oh, I don't get it. Like, why don't they like school? Like they're here free. I'm like paying all this money to be here. And, you know, like there was so many things that were different. And of course, this is not like everyone's experience, but just from what I saw in my seat, like it was just interesting. And even down to those little small things, like sometimes I would find myself in that moment of, man, I kind of wish I was privileged enough to do what they do. And now I like cringe at that because I'm like, oh, I'm so thankful for the struggle. I know that sounds weird, but I'm thankful for the struggles I went through because it taught me things that I'm going to keep passing on to my kids. And that's a whole separate topic, like my nephew, seeing them grow up. But, you know, it's a different experience. But yeah, I look at my parents and I look at the struggle that they went through. I even look at our family and the struggles that we went through together. And I'm always motivated, like, I'm thankful for that. And that's part of that personal growth, like really unraveling all these layers and having gratitude instead of anger and having love instead of, I wish I had XYZ. You know, that's part of the process of identity, in my opinion.
Well, I wish I had XYZ is also the things that were taught to us by our immigrant parents, right? Like they came here for, you know, physical safety, but also for material betterment, right? And so they came here wanting the 2-car garage and you know, the nice car and the house and all that stuff. Yeah. So that makes us want, you know, it forces those desires, those value systems on us, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard.
And that's a really hard thing to navigate right now. Like thinking about generational wealth, but then judging other people who feed off of their families financially. It's so weird. And I was reflecting on this the other day, like, I don't know what I want. And, you know, like seeing my family, or, you know, my brothers and my sisters and raising their children, like they're also not, you know, rich. So they're still growing up in a little bit of a struggle, but not so much the way that we experienced it. But, you know, even seeing one of my brothers who is, you know, financially well, he like literally opened up to me the other day, like, I don't know how I want to raise my children. Like, I don't know how I want to raise them because we know struggle. Our new stuff was like hand-me-downs.
Yeah.
And like, we were so excited. We're like, damn, we got new toys. We were
I swear my mom's jeans to school, okay? And I would stunt in them.
No way.
I would stunt in them, dude.
Yeah, dude, work it. But no, it's so funny because my dad would not clean. He would build houses, right? He was in construction. And sometimes he would work for these really rich people and they would have these bags of like toys and stuff. They're like, oh, you guys take them for your kids. And my dad, he would come back with like a bag of toys. I still remember this so vividly. My brother and I were so excited. We like ran to the car. We're like, oh my God, new toys. And like we opened them up and just started playing with them. They were like broken. Like it was a whole thing.
Yeah.
And now looking back, I was like, oh, that's kind of sad a little bit, but it's kind of funny too, because we were just so innocent at that time. But
do you ever have that? Like when you look back and you're like, you have, a memory comes to you, like you're laying in bed and it's like 1 o'clock in the morning and a memory comes to you that you kind of forgot.
Yeah.
And it's, maybe you're a kid and like that, right? You remember toys being brought to you and then you remember like, man, that was so sad. And I didn't know it at the time, but it hurts you then when you're thinking about it. You're like, holy shit, my life gets deeper than I even want to realize.
Exactly. It's that part. Someone once told me like, Jasmine, you know what I love about your stories? That you came from nothing and now you're here. And for me, you know, someone who always likes to reflect, I was like, I don't really feel like I came from nothing though. Like growing up, yeah, it's definitely, I have those moments where I'm like, that's kind of sad.
Yeah.
And I didn't even realize, you know, cause it's like, you're innocent, you grow up, it's your reality. But I don't really see myself in my story as like this girl that came from nothing, because I had a lot of things that people didn't have. I had love, I had family, and you know, my family was hella close. Like we were like a tight knit, like everywhere we went was together. We did everything together. And, you know, I grew up in a beautiful culture, comiendo baleadas, you know, and like all the baleadas, all the plátano maduros. Like
there's a great Honduran restaurant here in Vegas. Yuca, right? Yuca con chicharrón.
Yuca con chicharrón. Hey.
Una tostada with repollo.
Con repollo. All the food. But you know, like that's how I grew up. And like for me, I'm like, I felt like I had everything, you know? Like I may have not traveled the world when I was like 5. I may have not like seen anything outside of my little bubble in San Diego, but I felt like I had a really cool childhood. Like then we had our little thing, right? We like went through a lot of trials and tribulations together, but even then, like we had family those entire moments together. And so again, practicing gratitude, but it was just funny when someone said that to me, like nothing to something. I'm like, I don't see life that way. I don't see like,
well, something doesn't come out of nothing, right? Something can only come from something. It can't come from nothing.
Exactly. And so, yeah, it's very interesting, that perspective of nothing, right?
Yeah,
like,
no, it's so true though. Like me, my brother, and my friends that I grew up with, we all say like the happiest time of our life was probably like middle school. And materially, that's when we were the most, you know, I mean, my dad was gone. My mom worked from 9 p.m. to like 4 in the morning. I was the oldest. I had to take care of my brother and my sister. And we would just, when she would to work, we would go out and just be out all night. And we had nothing, right? We would starve. There's days we wouldn't eat, you know. There's days we wouldn't even drink anything, you know. But those are the happiest times of my life, right? And when you make that realization, it makes you fucking bulletproof, right? Because you're like, it's not there's so many people who are chasing the house and the car and thinking, I'm going to be happy. I'm going to feel complete if I have those things. And you just know, like, luckily I came from it. I didn't have to learn it. You just know, like, man, they're chasing fool's gold, right? Like when they get it, they're going to realize, oh, I'm not these things. I'm not this car. I'm not this house.
And it's interesting because I do find myself in these moments, going back to what you said earlier about this is what our parents did want, the 2-car garage, the house. In a way, I still find myself chasing that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not for myself, though. It's like for them. Like, I want to buy my parents a house. I want them to feel financially secure. I want them to do X, Y, Z. And like, that's why, and I talked about this too. This is a lot of first gens, sons, daughters, immigrants. We sometimes ignore what we want just so that our families can have whatever they came here for. And I was talking about that because talking about my podcast, one of my colleagues who is pretty well off, privileged, she's like, you should just like do this full time, the podcast. And I'm like, well, I don't make any money off of this podcast, so I can't. So hence I'm going to work my full-time job. I'm going to work my 2 side hustles and I'm going to do this podcast. And they're like, how do you do it all? I'm like, we figure it out. That's like the way we grew up, you know?
Yeah.
So to me, I'm like, yeah, I'm like hella busy, but I'm also doing things that I like. And I also get to be financially secure.
Yeah,
and save up for all the things that my parents want. Do you know what I'm saying?
yeah, it's crazy that, I mean, as coming from an immigrant culture, we have that split personality where, we have the woke, let's say, American culture, right, that teaches us that we're not supposed to
Mm-hmm.
want things and it's all about self-care and relax and chill and be friendly. And then
Mm-hmm.
that immigrant culture it's not woke, right? Immigrant culture is
No,
not woke.
grind for yourself.
You are just a shell. You are a machine. You don't have a
Mm-hmm.
heart. You don't have a soul.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're Catholic, right? I'm an atheist, right? But I was raised Catholic and I'm still
Mm-hmm.
culturally Catholic. So there's, use another one of your words, hella guilt, hella
Yeah.
shame, right? Like, why do I feel these things? Why don't I want to be rich?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't I want to grind and and it's
Es
just,
que vos sos americano. That's what I hear a lot.
yeah.
Es que vos esto. And I'm like, yeah. Like it is. I mean, this is where I grew up too.
Right.
So I can't, as much as I tried to in the past, like I can't not say I'm American,
Oh, for sure.
because I am. And
And
I may not agree with a lot of the things that happen in the world in our country, but there is, like you said, the woke culture, like that came from America.
yeah,
And that's what I definitely have. Hella, I mean, Latinos don't say that. I got
yeah.
that from the Bay Area and like when I was living there. So there's just so many things where I'm like, I can't not have that identity because it is part of who I am.
Yeah,
As
for
much as
sure.
I try to be like, I'm just Honduran, I'm not American. Like I would say that, I would get so offended, but I'm like, you know what? It's just the way that I defined American in my head.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to be like, no. But going back to the woke culture, I definitely like that. And it's true.
No, it's true. I mean, and I do like it. I mean, I don't fully adopt it, but I'm enlightened,
Yeah,
right?
same.
Enlightening enlightenment is a lifelong journey, right? I'm on it. I'm on that
Mm-hmm.
path. But yeah, and on the other side of the coin, like they want those material things. They want to come here and grind because they are Honduran, right? They're more Honduran than we are. And in Honduras,
Yeah.
the value systems are different. And in America, the value systems are different. And I always tell my grandma that, like, you came here so that I can achieve the American dream. And you thought you being an immigrant
El
you thought
sueño
that
americano. Yep.
you thought the
Which is a whole different topic.
right.
Yeah.
Because immigrants come here thinking the American dream is one thing, right? And they think it's the house and the car and the job. And my grandma, I tell a story all the time. My grandma's like, I don't care what you do. I was the first person in my family to go to like a university. And she said, I don't care what you study. Just, I want you to, whatever job you get, doctor, lawyer, businessman, whatever, I want you to wear a tie and carry a briefcase. I definitely don't do those things. But
neither do I.
But I told her, like, you came here and you're grinding so that your kids and your grandkids can achieve the American dream. And the American dream is to be exactly what you want to be, whatever it is you want to be, each of us, right? And that's the American dream, because that's not what's available to you in Honduras, right? If you're in Honduras and you want to start a podcast, right? How the fuck are you going to do that? And who's, you know what I mean? But it's, I mean, we could have this conversation for hours.
For hours, yeah.
Because
I know.
being Latino, it's not
thing.
a race. And then there's the ethnic thing. There's the nationalities. There's the religion. There's the history of how we've been treated.
There's so much. There's so much. And to the flip side of that, there's also so much beauty, and so much that I'm like so proud of. And I was watching, I said this in my last episode, but I just watched Stand and Deliver, which used to be one of my favorite movies. But watching it now, I had a different perspective, and I caught on to one part that I'd never even like noticed before. He says, why don't you guys like math? And they were like, just saying they didn't like math and they didn't like math. And then he goes, but math is in your blood. It comes from the Mayans. And that part, like, it just kind of hit me differently, because I'm like, oh my God, like for so long, especially us who grow up in like Black and brown communities, sometimes marginalized, no, it's marginalized communities, but we grow up in those spaces, especially, for myself and my history, low income space. And that was school. We hated school, like we felt dumb. I felt dumb. And I tried so hard to be like the best student, the best this, the best that, but I always felt behind. But seeing that Stand and Deliver, seeing it and like hearing that part, like this is in your blood. this is like our ancestry. Like they created math.
Yeah.
I was just like, man, like imagine if we can teach our communities of all the things that we accomplished, our ancestors have accomplished, everything that is so naturally a part of us in our blood that we don't even realize.
Yeah.
I think the world can just like freaking flip upside down. Like if we know the value that we have brought into this world.
The
So,
world would be way better if everybody, black, white, wherever you come from, knew more about their roots, where they come from.
and it's that.
I have a 16-year-old stepdaughter, and she, a couple of years ago, went through this phase where she wanted to be, she's pure Mexican. She wanted to be Italian. Am I part Italian? You know, she took a 23andMe test, genealogy test. She finds out that she's part, Northern Italian or, way back. But I'm like, no, you're just Mexican. She goes, just Mexican? I'm like, what's wrong with that? I'm telling her, I'm not even Mexican, and I'm telling this, my Mexican stepdaughter about Mexico and the Aztecs and the history of Mexico, right? And how all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, there's this whole thing of like, we want to attach to European culture, right? That makes us better, right? There's this really good book that you would like. It's called Before 1492. It's all about the history. I don't know if you read it. It's the history.
I've heard of it.
It's like,
it's on my list.
It's all about how the Americas were before Columbus came. Like we think like, oh, he found this savage land that was untamed and there was no, there's actually like high civilization here. Like the Incas had one of the most, developed societies in the whole world. And the only reason that the Europeans conquered is because they were better at war, really, right? They were better
and they brought hella diseases, but
oh, right. Yeah.
Right.
There's a theory.
Not even like the war stuff, but it's just like, they just killed everyone off because they didn't know about all these diseases and they caught them.
Yeah, we still don't know like how many millions of people died in that first 100 years, right? It could be like, there's some numbers up to like 20 million Indians in 100 years just from smallpox. And like the historian talks about like when they would go places, they would find empty villages and they thought that the villagers just left. And now historians are starting to think, and archaeologists are starting to think that, oh no, that wherever the conquerors arrived and it was empty, that smallpox had gotten there before and just wiped everybody out. So when they got there and they found an empty land, they thought, oh, there's nobody here. No, motherfucker, the disease you brought through pigs killed everybody, It's...
But it's, again, not knowing our history, right? Like, even not having all the facts there. So that's why I, like, love storytelling because, again, like, I say this all the time, but if no one's telling our stories, if we're not telling our stories, then that story's going to be told for us and the narrative is going to be written for us. So that's my goal too with this podcast, is really amplifying our stories and our voices, because it's not just all one way. And if we're not telling it, if we're not representing, then other people are going to try to do it for us.
You're the youngest in your family, right? And
I'm the youngest.
So, and I know somebody, my
there's a lot to talk about there.
Yeah,
because I was hella shy. We didn't touch on that, but I was hella shy growing up. I was so loud in my family, being the youngest. I was just la inquieta. I was like, I couldn't like stay still. I was always moving around. I was always wanting to do something. But the minute someone else came through the door, I was like so quiet.
What was that about, do you think?
It came from a lot of things. And I've had to do a lot of reflecting on this because I'm like, I don't know where that came from, but really growing up as the youngest and by far the youngest. So my brother and I were the two youngest and we're 6 years apart. And my oldest brother, he's 45. So there's a big gap, and like I was the youngest, la princesa, they called me.
The youngest.
the
youngest of the youngest. Yeah.
The youngest of the youngest. And so whenever they would have conversations about, cosas de adultos, adult things, I was never in the picture. So then I would always kind of be by myself and like wanting to like know the conversation. Like that's where the chismosa in me came out. But I was like, what are they talking about? Why can't I be a part of it? And
crawling
I would just be in my room
into the sala and shit.
yeah. Because then like my brothers, they were in high school and they would bring over all their friends and I would want to be a part of it. And like I was, and like it was fun, but I was always like left out.
Yeah.
And, whether it was adult conversations between my family and like, I still would like listen in. Like my brothers, like they snuck out in the middle of the night and like they had a conversation, but I wasn't allowed to be a part of it. So I would just be in my room trying to listen in. But whenever it would be like family gatherings, I was never allowed to have an opinion. I was always asked to step away. And so I think over time, and this wasn't obviously purposeful, but over time I was kind of conditioned to just be the quiet one and like not say anything, and just be the girl that brought the good vibes. Like just be the one that's like fun and the one that has an opinion. And there's a lot of things that I had to bear from myself because it translated in a lot of different facets of my life. Whether it was in school, if they asked me if I had an opinion, I'd be like, no,
No.
even though I did. And I was like, oh my God. And I would write it down and be like, all these things, right? And I actually had a professor of mine in college who like pointed that out for me. He was like, he would always ask me every class, Jasmine, do you have an opinion? And I'd be like, no. Jasmine, do you have an opinion? Nope. Every time. And he would always call on me. And I was like, why does he keep calling on me? And I remember I did this paper and I got a C on it. And someone who loves school, who was always trying to get good grades because, I had to sponsor my dad a couple years after. It's a whole different story. But I was like, why did I get a C? And I was so upset. And I go into his office and I'm like, freaking that like, so pissed being that loud Latina, be like, what happened with my paper? I like did everything you asked for. It's good. I like read it a couple times, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, sit down. Like, it's okay. Like, chill, relax. And he goes, this grade, I gave it to you because I wanted to see what your opinion was going to be, if you were going to call me out or not.
He's good.
And he was like, yeah, amazing professor, Robert James, shout out. But he goes, why don't you speak up in class? And I was like, I don't know, because I don't have an opinion. He's like, your papers, you right now, you clearly have an opinion, but you're like not sharing it. So that was the first moment that someone like really saw the potential in me. And they were like, why don't you speak? Like, use your voice. And I mean, look at me now. I use it every single day in
crazy.
work. I know, that's my family. Even like every time I told them I'm doing, like communications work. Cool. Yeah, they'd be like, what? You never spoke. And I'm like, because y'all never asked me anything. Yeah. And again, it's not purposeful. They weren't trying to be that way. It's just so ingrained in like the youngest people just step out of the room because we're having adult conversations. Like that's just part of the culture. And so it's just kind of funny. Like once he told me that, and once I realized the power in my voice, like there was no stopping me. Like now I use it every single day and like I make a career out of it. And now no one can shut me up. I'm just like, I have an opinion on everything now.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to ask you, like being the youngest, like, and there's undocumented, everybody's undocumented except for the brother who's older than you.
Me and my brother.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting.
You must feel like the whole pressure of the family coming down on you, especially not even your brother, because your brother, you're more American than your brother. You know what I mean? In an immigrant family, you're more American. So meaning you have more potential. I mean, when did you first feel that as a kid?
Oof, when I went to college.
Oh yeah.
Even before then, actually, I was going to say high school, I think, the very beginning of it, because my brother, he's 6 years older than me. So when I was in high school, he was already in college. And they would always say things like, oh, Patrick's partying and he's doing this and he's doing that. And they would always have the sense of like, he's not doing it right. And so for me, there was this unspoken pressure of when you go to college, you better not do this. Like when you go to college, you're going to be perfect. When you go to college, you're going to do blah, blah, blah. And
not giving you any advice on how to do it, but just giving you that pressure.
Yeah. And it was everything. Like my brother had gotten married, but he was ill prepared to get married in their opinion. Like everyone was doing things wrong and they would like talk about it in front of me. So like, it was like me taking mental notes of like, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do this. Don't do. And like, can you just imagine like 6 siblings before you and all of them doing something wrong and they're talking about it and you're there in the room and you're like, okay. Yeah. And I was just like, I can literally list out a thing, like all these things of what I'm not supposed to be doing. And I still feel that pressure today. Like, and it eats at me sometimes because I'm like, it's so much. Like sometimes I just like lay down and I'm like, I just can't, I can't do live today. Like, it's just so much. But just, like it's interesting being the youngest because you are, one, learning from all of your siblings before you and all of their experiences, but you also have the sense of pressure of this is the wrong way to do it. And this is how you're going to be different. And so I always have the sense of like, man, I have to be perfect. I have to have this perfect, like exterior and like perfect experiences. And like when I don't, I'm so hard on myself. And like
That's crazy because like
so
being the
hard.
oldest, I never saw it that way. Oldest people who are the oldest, they always say, "Oh, it's the hardest for you because you're the first. You're going out into the battlefield first, right?"
And I'm
But
sure it is, yeah, in its own respect.
for that reason, it is. But now I'm realizing like, oh, there's actually a freedom in being the first because like there's no example. So wherever I step is my choice. And if I make a mistake, well, oh well, I didn't know any better. I didn't have any example. But like being the youngest sounds like you're like in fucking Wipeout, that show, right? Where
Yeah.
everybody, all your siblings go and they get wiped out on this or that or the other. And you're like, hey, I got to avoid that. I got to jump over that.
Yeah.
But you're still
and
fucking nervous because you've seen them all get blasted by your parents.
And yeah, it's a struggle. And it's interesting because my older siblings don't see it that way. Going back to what you said of like, you are more American, like for them, that's what I am. You have more opportunity. My parents are so easy on you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, y'all have no idea. But I don't even argue with them. I'm like, yeah, I mean, whatever you say.
It's like you said, everybody struggles their own, right? Their struggle is a struggle, and your struggle, they will never know your struggle, right?
And even going to like talking about pressures of being the youngest, when my brother, the one that's 6 years older than me, we're both the youngest, when he got married or when he, joined his partner and she had a baby. So he now has a baby, but it's different because he didn't buy my parents a house. He didn't provide these things that we're supposed to be providing our parents. He ended up going into his own journey. And now I feel another sense of pressure of like, all right, it's all on me now. I have to like save up to get my parents a house. I have to do X, Y, Z. I have to do all the things that my siblings didn't do. So that's the new sense of pressure.
Machismo, right? That's sexism too, right? That because you're a girl, so you're the princesa of the family, right? And that's different than being un prince, a prince. A prince can do different things than a princess can do, right?
Oh, since like childhood. My brothers would be out until like 2 a.m. and it was completely fine. But if the girls were out past 9, God forbid.
Yeah.
Dios mío, la muchacha anda ya. And it was just this big deal. And so, I mean, I never did that because again, I was trying to be perfect. So I would be like on the dot. It's 9, I'm here. Or if like I was out with friends, I'd be like, I'm calling them like all panicking, like I'll be home and blah, blah, blah. And they would call me goody two shoes. I'm like, y'all don't know how they scold if they're like, I saw la chancla, the belt, the broom, all of it. I'm like, I'm not trying to do all that. But it is an interesting pressure being the youngest. And it definitely, like I said, translates into my entire life and the way I function and the way that I like live. And that's the whole therapeutic part about all of it, is like everything in your childhood is like a part of you and it's how you live life. And that's a really interesting topic to dive into and unpack, but that's therapy right there.
Yeah. I mean, your parents separated?
No, they're still together.
Oh, they're still together. I don't know why I got that impression.
No, but that's a whole different situation too, because all of my siblings are half siblings. They never grew up with their biological dad. They grew up with my father being their father figure. And like, I never realized that like they had different dads blood wise. Cause they always called my dad dad.
Yeah.
My dad is their dad. But for my sisters, that caused a different type of relationship. So there was a different kind of pressure to don't do the things that your sisters did. But then when I look at it and I like look back at all the things that they did, I'm like, oh my God, they were navigating daddy issues. Like that has a bad connotation to it, but it's true. Like not having your biological father there can really mess with you. And especially for girls, right? Like daddy's girls and whatnot, they didn't have that. And they saw me, La Princesa, with her dad all the time. And they were like, oh, she has it all. And it causes different type of relationship with them, which is very interesting to navigate through now. But
it's funny how with your siblings, you take shit out on each other just for whatever relationship you think they have with one of your parents. You know what I mean? Like if you think that your mom treats them better or they're nicer to your mom, even if they're nicer to your mom, you resent them because it's a competition, right? Like you said, I want to provide for
So
my
interesting.
parents.
Mm-hmm.
And on the flip side of that, you're talking about daughters and fathers. For men, I'll speak for myself.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't have you didn't have a good relationship with your mom. Me and my mom were fucking oil and vinegar, man.
Mm.
Oil and vinegar. Oh yeah, something like that. We didn't get along, is to say that. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, that causes problems too. I mean, nobody really talks. Talks about daddy issues, right? Nobody talks about mommy issues in
Yeah,
men. You know,
I'm
and
sure.
again, I mean, we can. I've taken up too much of your time, but we can
It's a
hopefully
good
we'll get into that.
conversation.
I'll bring you back on, or I'll go on your podcast and we'll talk about it because there's so much that that I want to talk to you about.
Yeah.
But
We'll
it's been
schedule a time because I want to have you on my podcast too.
for
I'm curious
sure.
to learn more about you.
For sure. Let everybody know where they can find out, listen to the podcast and find you on social media.
Yeah. So I'm everywhere. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, on Twitter, even on Facebook, but that's more for family and cheeseman. But you can find me on.
Isn't it funny how we use social media? Like each thing has to be used differently. And I didn't know that
so
at
differently.
first. I didn't know that at first, but I
Yeah,
learned it
it's
now.
funny because this is my field. So I literally had a class on social media and how each one is different, but I totally don't use it anymore. I'm like, I'm me on all these platforms. Like you'll
And now
get
you have
my
the
opinions
podcast.
and
Like just listen to the podcast. Now you know what's going on with me,
yeah, literally like all of me is out there.
Right.
But on Twitter, I'm at Odalys Jasmine. On Instagram at Jasmine with 4 A's. Sorry, it's complicated, but find me on LinkedIn. And also my podcast is Hella Latina or Hella Latino. It has an @ sign at the end. So Latin at, if you want to be more specific. And you can find us on Spotify, on Apple, and also on Google Podcasts. And we're soon to be on YouTube and all the things and trying to be more, in person. But yeah, you can find me there.
Yeah, people are so visual, like they'll listen, right? There's a lot of people who listen to podcasts and they just listen to it. But a lot of people will just play the YouTube video and not even, I know I do that. I'll play a YouTube video of a podcast and not even be watching it, but listening to it. But as far as the Latino thing too, like I heard that Latina with an E accent and E at the end. That's the new.
I saw that too.
That's the new trend.
There's just so many. It exhausts me.
Yeah.
I'm just exhausted. I'm like, that's why I start every single episode with how do you identify?
Yeah.
And then you tell me.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to push people into a box, you know what I'm saying? Like everyone can just identify as, maybe you identify as Honduran, Puerto Rican, and you don't want to be named Latino. Again, everyone has their own perspective on it, and that's fine. That's
or sometimes you feel more Honduran than Puerto Rican. Sometimes you feel more Puerto Rican than Honduran. Sometimes I'm more black than brown. Sometimes I'm more white than anything, because I have a Croatian grandfather. So that's another story.
Our history is so complicated, but we'll talk about that in the podcast.
One last question: do you ever think that you would invite one of your siblings on or family members? I mean,
that's in the works actually.
Yeah.
I am bringing on my 2 brothers who, one of them, he went into the military. So when we were going through our experience with homelessness, he was the only one that had a full-time job. So he was like kind of a provider. And the oldest dude providing for his family, like that's a lot of pressure too. And he found that there was an opportunity with the Army, and like learning about the Army and talking about Latinos going into the Army is a big thing.
My
too.
brother's a Marine. Yeah.
Yeah. So my brother went into the Army. He served about 15 years. And so talking about that whole experience and like why he left and how it changed him and all of that. And then my other brother, who is the one that's 6 years older than me, he is different. He went to college. He was the very first one to go to college. I followed into his footsteps. And he just went through a lot of different experiences. Even though we went to the same university, we were in the same area, we were the first ones to go to college in our families. Like we still had very different experiences. So it's going to be a cool conversation, but I'm having them to come on.
That's awesome. No, the only reason I ask you is because it's so funny how a lot of people don't want to be vulnerable on a podcast, right? They don't want to, be informal or tell about themselves, even in your family, right? Especially in your family.
Oh yeah, my brothers are not vulnerable. My brother that's in the military is the first one to say I'm not vulnerable and I don't want to be. I
Yeah.
was like, well, for this podcast, you got to be. So,
Well, I look forward to that
but
episode.
yeah. But thank you for inviting me. Thank you for just having this really casual, dope conversation. Like I appreciate it.
Well,
And
thank you so
for
much
this
for coming
platform.
on, and I look forward
Yeah.
to listening to more. Anybody, go check out Jasmine's. How do you say your first name?
Odalys.
Odalys.
Yeah. Odalys, Jasmine, either one.
Go check out her her podcast, Hello Latino. Thank you so much, Jasmine, for coming on. We'll keep in touch for sure, and let me know when I can come on your show.
Yes.
So I can spill my guts to you.
Yes. We can unpack.
Take it easy. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Bye.